Okay, we are live. This is Noreen at the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. And today I have a wonderful guest with me, Durga Leela. And Durga is the creator and the producer of a number of programs that integrate yoga and Ayurveda with recovery and the 12 steps. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend her 12-week online program titled Between the Mat and the Meeting, Ayurvedic Healing for All Addictive Tendencies. Welcome, Durga.
Hi, Noreen. Nice to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I know a little bit about your background, having attended the course, but for our viewers and listeners, could you say a little bit about your background, how you came to be doing the kind of work that you're currently doing and have been doing for, I believe, about 15 years, how you came to Ayurveda. So just a little bit about your background.
Yeah. I am a person in long-term, and I like to call it progressive recovery. So initially I approached a 12-step program and got abstinent from alcohol. And as I engaged with myself unmedicated, I did realize that I had other attachments that were still causing disruptions to my mood, and long term was going to disturb my health. And so I needed assistance to move into greater abstinence and emotional sobriety. So it had a lot to do with my people issues. I was raised with alcoholism in my family from a young age. And I pretty much formed Yoga of Recovery when I needed to give up smoking cigarettes, which was a tough one for me. And that was about 18 months after getting sober. And that's when I pulled in my practice of Hatha Yoga, which had been something that I did since I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And by then I was probably mid 30s, and I needed to get back to that. And then I was graced with the system of Ayurveda, and that really helped me form a wellness design for living for myself and really become active in my own living well plan and program. So it was a life changer, and that's really where Yoga of Recovery comes from. And I could see we really just had a great need for some kind of physical medicine that made sense at all levels of our being, the physical body and the mental emotional side of things, and then also the spiritual perspective. And I found that some systems completely ignore different layers of our being. And so therefore it's difficult for us in recovery to find a system of medicine, especially something that looks at the embodiment that we are and works at that with the consciousness at the core of the suggestions. So that's where Yoga of Recovery forms from, which is, it's a great blessing in my life, and it's really nice to share it with others.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know yoga is really a spiritual program that focuses on the mind, whereas Ayurveda is the body, so they go hand in hand. Could you speak to how they interrelate and support each other?
Yeah, so it's known, yoga and Ayurveda really as sister sciences. And the Ayurveda is really about the management to become a good custodian of the body, which the material aspect is the mind too. And so it's a pathway of self-understanding and self-healing. And then that takes us in a strong foundation to be able to do what yoga offers. And at its highest level, yoga offers us a path of sadhana, which is rigorous spiritual practices towards the aim of self-realization. Mm-hmm. But when Ayurveda interfaces with yoga initially, usually it's the yoga chikitsa side. So using yoga methods for therapeutic means
Mhm.
So we'll approach like the physical aspect of yoga, asana and pranayama and things, especially to bring us to a balanced psychology. And Ayurveda precedes that by giving us a balanced metabolism, sleep, energy. That's the three pillars of life that Ayurveda is working with. So
Yeah.
the two really are, sisters. That they love and support each other, and one foundational, and it allows us to grow with the other one.
Awesome. And I know that in the program, it's not an all or nothing thing like the 12-step program here and yoga and Ayurveda here. You're really integrating all three, and
Yeah.
you're weaving in the 12-step concepts into your course, Ayurveda Between the Mat and the Meeting. So tell me about that. How did that come into play for you? And how is that helpful to people who are in all stages of recovery?
Yeah, it's a big picture. So firstly, I want to clarify, you hear me weave in some 12-step language because
Sure.
that's my foundational program. Yoga of Recovery weaves Ayurveda and yoga into any recovery pathway.
That's thanks for that clarification. Yeah.
Because there really are so many manifestations of addiction,
Mhm.
and there are increasingly more recovery pathways, and all of them are to be celebrated. And in truth, all of them pretty much need a support where we bring in a deeper understanding of the embodied self. And like the program of where we focus more on the Ayurveda healing part is called Between the Mat and the Meeting. So people hear of yoga recovery, they instantly think it's a hatha yoga program to support people in recovery. And it is that, but that's a very small piece of it. So the physical aspect that we're talking about is really the embodiment, and it has an awful lot to do with metabolism. That's
Sure.
one of the core practices of Ayurveda. And there's the aspect also of the yoga, but there's where yoga recovery goes in its other program, Healing the Habits That Bind. We have 6 tenets, and that's where we bring in the recognized need of the person to elevate their actions and expressions away from self-destructiveness and into like a path of consciousness. And that's usually guided by what we say are the paths of yoga. And so the different paths of yoga have different perspectives. All yoga offers us a very depth view of psychology, and then it invites us to certain practices.
Yeah, I know that's great, because I think the beauty of Ayurveda is, especially in all stages of recovery, but particularly in early recovery, is trying to integrate new habits for old habits. And Ayurveda has this concept of daily routine that I think is very reassuring and very healing to actually for everyone, but particularly someone who's entering recovery.
And it's a lot to do with the Ayurveda approach is self-understanding. And then just it's very hard to change a habit when it's all you think about. So like where your attention goes, your prana, your life force goes. So if anything, if you focus too much on the problem, you magnify the problem.
Yes.
And so we try to change the awareness back into the embodied self, hopefully a calm centered self. That takes some practice, but we definitely get there.
Absolutely.
And then we build practices to sustain that calm centeredness within the embodied self, which it's very foundational. So it supports you throughout the day when all the triggers can happen. But these practices support you, and it really is person-centered medicine. So one of the aspects that people really enjoy about it is that it is personalized. So we begin to understand our reactions, even our reactions in recovery, and those continue. So I think recovery is pretty much misunderstood, and a lot of people think that it's to do with alcohol and drugs. And of course it does have to do with that, but there's a whole range of behaviors. So we work with the statement, there's one addiction process, and it's alive and well within most of us. And so it allows us to come together. And what's interesting about yoga recovery, after teaching it for many, many years, you know, people asked for a certificate course and I provided that, but there wasn't that much difference between people who came on a retreat and people who came on a certificate course, because many of the people who end up working in addiction
Sure.
Have had some kind of experience of it in their past. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's an alcoholic or drug addict, and more modern language, it doesn't mean that everyone has a substance use disorder, because really what is the addictiveness of our society is how we are affected by loving and being connected with people who are in that self-destructive addictiveness. And that's well beyond alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why I love what you call it, addictive tendencies.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the inherent nature of the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's on your website, there was a testimonial on your website. The way Durga has weaved together the causes and therapies for addiction from the Ayurvedic, yogic, and 12-step point of view is mind-blowing. Take this course. So I just wanted to put that out there. And in an article about your work, you said shift into dependence into another substance. Once this is kind of what you were referring to, the addictive nature of our society, essentially, and our mind, that we often shift into dependence on another substance once the primary addiction has stopped via the 12 steps, whether it be food or codependence. And in yoga, we are looking for true power of our spiritual source. When yoga, mind, and Ayurveda, body, and 12 steps, this leads to a truly empowering personal system of recovery. So that's really beautiful. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that or elaborate?
Yeah, I think what I find interesting is that people, even in long-term recovery, seem to miss the very, very central fact that recovery is a disease of our relational self.
Sure.
So how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, that's the fundamental aspect. So really, it's a lot to do with our emotional core. It's really, I would say, if I was to choose the center at which it really affects us, it's the heart. So it's really a lot to do with the modern culture where we are connected to other people, but we can't really get to the rasa, the juice, the fulfillment of our relationships. And so we distract ourselves into a myriad of other habits that seem to like medicate that disconnect or separation or pain away, but then they sort of turn on us. That's like definitely diminishing results over time. So that cross addiction, you can call it, what it really turns out to be is often it's the roots of the addiction, which is kind of missed at the addiction treatment level, because we're still tending to treat people as if their unhealthy relationship with an alcohol or a substance is the main concern.
Right.
And really,
right.
like
It's a symptom.
Yeah, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
And so I think in the Ayurveda, what it gave to me was it gave me an idea of being able to recognize myself. And that really, the constitutional type allowed me to see that there was a difference in the way that I receive and express myself in the world. So sometimes we're held too tightly in other people's expectations of who we'll grow to be, and that we'll grow to validate or meet the needs of others. And we feel the great disappointment and guilt when we're unable to do that. And really our intention is to love and be loved, but there's many different fragmentations that happen on that relationship. And so we kind of start to self-medicate those undigested experiences that we have with the other, which the common term for that these days is trauma. And, you know, I refer to the trauma in Between the Mat and the Meeting Ayurveda for the addictiveness as the ama.
Yes, yes, I like that. I liked you bringing that in and taking that from the word trauma.
So that
because
that really
it really is experience and food, right?
Yes. So at the physical level, we can really struggle to digest what we throw at the body when we're trying to stuff our feelings around our relationships with others. Sure. But also our relationships with others have given us some things that are very difficult to digest. You know, the adverse childhood experiences in our communities these days, the adverse community experience that we see like on our streets, in the news, like with the drug pandemic, with systemic racism, you know, with the whole history of how we've treated each other, gender-based, race-based, even the way we treat children, that we have so many adverse childhood experiences. Maybe they are very underrepresented in their rights, you know. So, yeah, all of that is contributing to the way that we need to kind of find some refuge from the pain of that separation. So yoga of recovery operates on many different levels, but it makes it very accessible. So the ability to recognize yourself and understand that, yes, you are a spirit being, and there is always this like more top-down aspect of living, but then there's a really the grounded piece between the mat and the meeting. If you're lucky enough to have some kind of exercise or yoga practice with the body, that's physical. And then you have some kind of emotional, psychological community support with a therapist or a recovery pathway, peer support group. But what do you do with the other 22 hours of the day? That's when we're left to our own devices, and we often get kind of stuck back into just old conditioned patterns, which will become more and more addictive. And that's certainly what I experienced when I first put down alcohol. I was surprised at how attached I was against my will to other things. You know, I would just distract myself in other ways, and I kind of knew it wasn't a solution. It wasn't really going to work, but I couldn't stop myself doing it there and then. So I think that's part of it. But, you know, there's the ability and the need to deal with each one as they go. That's why I call myself a person in progressive long-term recovery, because I had to let go gradually once I built up some kind of self-understanding and understanding what I could do to support myself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I love the term progressive recovery, because it's, you know, there's the progressive nature of the addiction, but it's wonderful to reframe that and look at our recovery. And you also use the term evolutionary pathway, that this is an opportunity for our personal growth and evolution. And I think that's really important. You really build during the course. You start small, and then each week during the 12 weeks builds on what we learned and what participants learned in the prior week. So do you want to take a moment and give an overview of, you know, how you delve in, how you weave in Ayurveda? And then I could just share with you a couple of things that were really useful for me.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if I can remember. So one of the first things that I start with is understanding how Ayurveda views the cause of disease. And we can make a correlation with that to almost every description of addiction that comes from all the different models. So the Western model currently saying it's a brain disease model of addiction. So yes, we can recognize that there's imbalance in the brain. And then the 12 steps are a spiritual foundation. So they say it's a spiritual malady. And yes, that's the approach yoga takes, that all disease is spiritual in nature. So the one thing about yoga of recovery is that it's enabled to embrace all those different layers of our being. And like the separation of church and state sort of thing has made the medical field unable to embrace the more subtle, energetic and spiritual aspects of this disease. And also it kind of works beside the social services, but doesn't integrate the physical with the community aspects, you know. So, and Ayurveda really takes us all as one of the nicest things is microcosm and macrocosm. So what as above, so below. And so that really gives us the like an equal playing field, basically. So from there, Ayurveda says we will misuse our senses, we'll have crimes against wisdom, and there will be effects of time and environment, which makes an imbalance progressive the more it's repeated.
Actually, I love that aspect of, every week you had suggestions. And those suggestions were related to the threefold cause of addiction, according to Ayurveda. And one of the suggestions related to the mind, and another related to the senses. And initially, I wasn't quite sure what was going to come out of time, because I was wondering about you integrating the holidays and the celebrations around the world, the notion of time, and something that happened a century ago, but as the weeks progressed, I really loved that, because the nature of time in Ayurveda is very important. The seasons, the time of the day, and the more that we can flow and be integrated with that, the happier we are.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that and really grew to love that part of the program. And that was one of the main parts of the program.
Recovery, yeah.
Yeah. And it was really the action steps as well.
Yeah. We talk about the 1 day at a time healing.
Yes.
And yet we refer to how long we've been in recovery. So time is that interesting aspect, and we need to make it our ally. We also talk, like you mentioned, the holidays. We talk about so many people having real distress over the holidays, but when you step into your own spirituality, like your own idea of your source or spirit as the true essential nature of your being, then you're free to choose what you want to honor and celebrate as a holy day. So that's partly what we did together, was our time together. And so I would look at the upcoming week and connect people to sometimes more culturally based aspects of remembrance of people that have been maybe mistreated, or people who need a little bit more support from community in general. And so bringing that to mind, rather than just always this, either the aspect of religious holiday, which can be separating, or what has really been the monopolizing of all holidays as consumer days, ways to support our corporates.
Sure.
So that's something that I think most of us would want to move away from. So time is an aspect. So yeah, there's so much information that Ayurveda can give us that it needs to be digestible. One doesn't want to add to the whole long list of shoulds that we all have. So
actually, I believe that was a comment in one of the sessions about, well, how do I possibly do all this? And everyone is accessing it in different ways, the information, and processing in different ways. But how do you respond to someone who is feeling overwhelmed with Ayurvedic suggestions?
So again, it's relational. So it tells us that a lot of their dis-ease is about their relationship with time. And most of us have
that's beautiful.
Troubled relationship with time, where there's time sickness is one of the biggest dis-eases that we have.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it's yes, our mind is living in the past, and recovery tells us stop wishing for a better past, and then of course, the mind living into the future. But anxiety pretty much is faulty imagination. It's I thought one of my teachers told me that it's the great disease and it's belief in unreality.
Right, right.
Disease. So to allow your mind to project into a future that you are self-creating often means that that's where you're going to towards. And I think that's the bit of, after years of sitting with people, I could see that what we call the rajas, the projecting nature of mind, tends to project them into very scary situations.
Of
So
course.
like there has to be this base camp of being okay, which is
Yeah.
where I'm using mostly that any kind of technique that brings us back to present moment, back to the ability to sense into the body right now, and then be with the breath right now.
Right.
So the body sensing, the breath sensing, and I'm trained in yoga nidra, so that's a lot to do with what we call inner resourcing, getting to
Sure.
a ground of being or a place of security within us. So that's something that you guys did every week.
Yes, yes.
Really, that creates that space from which we can face the things that have been improperly digested, because we
Right.
tend to recreate them if we
Of course.
can.
I loved, I think one thing, there was many, many things that really I found just wonderful with the course, enlightening. But I loved when you talked about the addictive tendencies of the doshas.
Mhm.
And, for instance, vata, the three doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata, if we had to pick one word, it would be flight.
Mhm.
So whatever the primary substance is, that's put down, but then vata is still a person with that kind of tendency in their constitution. That is their response to stress, the addictive tendencies, and then the stress responses. I think it was the stress responses that I meant to, was referring to. But just to have a discussion about that, and to talk about pitta, which it's usually anger, and then kapha, which is the I think it was tendon befriend or something of that nature. And to really look at that, talk about it, and then look at your own situation in terms of certain behaviors that are acting out behaviors or conditional responses, habitual responses, and to try to look at how can I become free of this, and the awareness, the body sensing, all of that. So I found that to be really very useful in terms of.
That's partly, like the talk about stress and stress being the number one cause of disease, especially the chronic disease, the lifestyle diseases that the
Sure.
Western model is struggling with.
Yeah.
So as we go into that, then it kind of surprises me that people don't make the first connection that stress affects the digestive system first and foremost, because rather than rest and digest, there's this thing that says, activate and, either fly, escape, run away, and or attack, fight. And I was at the wildlife photography exhibit in London and looking at pictures of flight and fight. And so we have that aspect to our nature, and it does affect our ability to metabolize food. So in yoga recovery, we're very clear that the base acting out disorders that we're all involved in relate to food and people. And essentially, they are the same thing. So like your first
Yes.
food was a person.
I love that as well. I love that. I really do. And I was looking at that yesterday. I was looking at my notes. When you talked about food, you said it's interesting that our relationship with food, that there's one program for alcohol recovery, but there's many, many programs for food recovery. And you said that brought you to a light bulb went off, that it really wasn't about the food. It was about our relationships and our relationships with other and ourselves. So I thought, wow, that's yeah. And I think that food is a common one when you put down whatever the substance is that's creating the primary issue, then food and addictive tendencies toward food, and codependence, of course, really come up.
Yeah, and that's to do with, there's different layers to it, and I always hope that I can put across what we're really touching upon, but there is the what I recognize, and it's after years of working with people. So there's experience-based medicine we're speaking about here, and when I speak about it, people understand it because they have these different sensations. So there is a stress reaction, but there's also what is the stress, but there's also the situation of the stress. So I might be stressed at work and then I come home and act it out with my family. I might be stressed at home and I go to school and I act it out there. So there is the opportunity to express ourselves, and where is that situation arising? Because often where we are stressed is not where we can flight or fight from, so I can't tell my boss where to go because I need the job. So I come home and it warps itself into some other behavior with someone else. So it's hard to pick that up because it looks like I'm behaving this way with you, but the cause is over here to the side. Not seeing that. Doing psychodrama in different conferences that I've been teaching at also is often the cause is a person that has passed. And so you're unable to see it, but there's something there, that undigested relationship with a grandparent or a parent even, that is just going on and on. So there's so many different aspects to that, but then also the actual functional level of the body. So those stress responses, we're capable of all of them. And we have to be, we have to be able to get away, let flight when we can.
Yeah, there's a necessity in certain situations.
Yeah, it's survival mechanisms. Right. Yeah. And it's survival mechanisms that, tend to be focused upon when we lose connection with spirit. So when we are more into the mind-body nature, like really in the stress of separation, then it gets worse. So the aspect like the Dalai Lama would talk about is one has to remember your philosophy, your connection, your God type of thing, like what brings you back to the peace of your heart. Because that has to be a balance in this biological system. So the aspect of flight is more supported for a person that is a Vata dosha type, because they are light and they're mobile and they're they have a kind of a natural tendency to movement.
Yes. It's consistent with the qualities of Vata.
Yeah. And the same with Pitta. Pitta, it's light, but it's hot. So its organism can more easily defend itself by being a little bit scary, by being a little threatening, like letting you know that if you come any closer, there will be a fight.
Sure.
And then Kapha, I think, like if I can say what I really have been distressed by is that we jump to freeze for Kapha. We're not understanding their activation state. And even within our field of yoga teaching, yoga therapy, we're following science, and that tends to be this or that, whereas we always work with the tri. There's tridosha, there's triguna. So there's that aspect of, for us, the aspect of materiality, the aspect of energy, and then the aspect of intelligence that regulates those two. Even in the doshas, we have the aspect of air and fire and water. So what is the activated state of a water element type? So they have the qualities of cold, heavy, moist, stable. So with those qualities, they can't really fly away.
Sure. They're not going to be flight like the Vata dosha.
Yeah, and they don't really have that nature towards fight. It's just not in their nature.
Yeah.
And we are following nature here.
Yeah.
And what their nature is to be loving and nurturing. And so that aspect of ourselves is the embodied codependency.
Yes, yes.
And
so under stress, their response would be to freeze and to.
So I wouldn't say freeze.
Okay.
Because in activation, it's not freeze.
Okay.
In down regulation, it's freeze, which for us is a guna called tamas.
Okay.
It brings inertia. It brings a negative feedback loop that's stuck in place.
Sure.
Whereas kapha, what you have, and you've got this talk about science, and they're talking about flight and fight, and then you've got the number one diseases in our society, which is really a lot to do with type 2 diabetes and obesity. Some people call it obesity.
Right.
Therefore, like a lot of just the embodied reality comes into that aspect of tend and befriend, people pleasing, trying to keep the peace around our relationships. And peace offering is food, and food has been largely corrupted. It's too accessible, it's too processed, we can get it at any time. So for all of us, that's one of the ways that we tend to, especially when it's available like that, outside of physical hunger, outside of proper nourishment.
We're really using it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And the wrong foods many times.
Yeah. If it is food at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah, I mean, a couple of questions for you. We'll have about 10 more minutes. And your teachers, you've talked about throughout the 12 weeks, you've talked about many teachers. Who are your greatest teachers? And I know there are many, and maybe name a few.
Yeah. So my first teacher would be my mother, who
that's beautiful.
Me, she taught me life, and I got to see the self-destructive side that she gravitated to, which my mother was alcoholic, and it eventually killed her. It brought on a heart attack. So when I was in London and I needed help, I approached a little center in London, which was called the Shivananda Yoga Center in Putney. And I would never go to the gym or whatever. So I did take up Shivananda yoga in London. And then when I needed help to get off cigarettes, so I'm a person in long-term recovery, I never went to rehab. So I went immediately into 12 steps. So you can say that every person that's ever been any part of any 12-step fellowship, you're my teachers. We sit as peers to talk about our life experience and be here in life and help each other heal. And so I pay great honor to that, because I, like many people, by the time I was looking to deal with this, I was in America in a medical system that is beyond the budget of most of us.
So true.
Very true. It needs to be dealt with.
Yes.
It has a hand in many of the adverse community experiences that we're dealing with, as does the criminal justice system.
No doubt.
I needed to get off of cigarettes, and that's when I was brought to, someone said to me, I said, I need a rehab for smokers. And they said, go to an ashram.
I loved when you shared that. Because I have spent time at the Shivananda ashram in Grass Valley as well, just recently. So I just loved, your reasons for going to the ashram, but I didn't realize you had been connected with Shivananda previously in London.
Yeah, just very tenuously connected, enough to go in for a class and run out the door. In truth, I was running out the door to go to the pub round the corner. And
yeah. Well,
it's a pathway.
That's great. Well, your response is beautiful, and I didn't expect it. I thought you would tell me Robert Sabota, Claudia Welsh. So I love your response and how you responded to that.
I would get to that, because from the Shivananda ashrams, that's where I met Mark.
Of course. Yes.
At CCA. Now, it was his female teachers that taught me Ayurveda. I hardly ever spent time with Mark, but he set it up because I think it was generally easier for men to set things up and succeed in them, even though I just started in 20 years ago, these studies. That has been the case. But Claudia has always been one of my like true like heart connections.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
She's very like real with the rest of us. And Robert Svoboda is like enormously helpful for his intense and amazing and intelligent view of how he knows the Vedas and can share them.
Yeah.
Himself has been a great help because he disseminates Vedic information in an amazing way. And the first book I ever read was called Overcoming Addictions by Deepak Chopra.
Yes.
And of course, I've gone to India for almost 20 years and I have a relationship with Dr. Ram Kumar and the people at Vijagram. And that's where yoga recovery takes us for physical medicine. So we go for ongoing rehabilitation. It's not just the rehab of getting us off our substances, but we have people who it's like a health share. We show up for treatment and we learn to balance our body and know more about the depths of our mind, psychology, and spirit and connectedness.
And this is a very long-term retreat, like almost a month. It's called Panchakarma. It's for Panchakarma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my understanding with Panchakarma is that not only are you detoxifying the body, but you're, a lot of it's nothing new that our emotions are stuck in our body, and that there is a lot of emotional release that can occur as well. I've never done a Panchakarma myself, but that's what I've read and other people have shared.
Yeah, and so the yoga recovery Panchakarma really, it's truly amazing because we have these very experienced and caring and spiritually based doctors in a clinic. And then we are there together. So we bring that aspect of the peer support. And then I bring an aspect of deep inquiry. And it's easier to do inquiry when you're almost like in that real tender loving care and like almost like a womb situation.
Of course. And fewer and the distractions are you're really focused.
Yeah. So we have major breakthroughs there.
Oh yeah.
It's a continuous process. This idea that addiction is an event and recovery is an event that can happen in a 28-day period is utter nonsense. So, we kind of move in and out of our, more conscious states, and then we lapse back into other like acting out behaviors, maybe relapse into the original drug of choice. But really these days, what does a drug of choice really mean? Because there's so much available to us. We see this technology addiction and all of that. So we have to approach this differently. And that's what Yoga of Recovery does. And there's plenty of people that are on board with this, and we welcome more because
sure. And I think part of Yoga of Recovery, my understanding is you're really creating a sangha.
Yeah.
And not only do you have the weekly course, but you also have a book club and you have a weekly recovery meeting as well.
Yeah.
You've talked about many books during the 12 weeks. I'm going to venture to say that you're a book lover.
I am, absolutely.
How about a favorite book or a book about yoga and recovery or Ayurveda and recovery that somebody who's new to yoga and Ayurveda, who's been in recovery, any suggestions for them where they start?
Okay, so I have to tell you that's a tough call when it comes to
have so many.
Yeah. No, I mean for Ayurveda, there really isn't.
You're writing the book.
I'm gathering what I can writing now.
Yes.
And I got to say that this is also not my material. So it comes from people like Claudia and David Frawley.
Sure. Okay.
And if I was to say the book that has helped me most would be David Frawley, Ayurveda and the Mind.
Yes.
Not sure if that's the first book that you would start with.
Yeah, David Frawley can maybe, yes, it might not be the first one, but.
But if you start to, get a little clearer and you want to really understand like that depth psychology connected with consciousness and spirit, then all David Frawley's books are beautiful.
Yeah.
And I have read all of those books by, Claudia and Robert and David Frawley. And now I see that there's a lot more books available, like from when I started studying 20 years ago. But really, there's a book of life.
That's true. That's true. And the story isn't necessarily what we predict, right?
Yeah, I think we tried to get too much into the theory. We tried to think that this is some kind of protocol, and I follow this, and this, and it's going to be all better. But this is the science of life. There are life components, and so become aware of those, and then watch the play. That's what life is.
Yeah. And well, actually, I think play is an important word, particularly. I find one of the weeks you talked about time and the necessity of journaling about or thinking about, are you giving enough time to play? Are you giving enough time to relaxation? Mm-hmm. And many times I find that people who are in recovery, there isn't necessarily time given to play.
Yeah.
So, that opportunity for play is often not, it's almost like there isn't an allowing of play, so.
There's a constant thing where we're asked in 12 steps, especially, not to take yourself too seriously.
Right.
And that really stems again from those people issues, because a lot of those issues stem from my sense of over responsibility for the actions of another.
Right.
And so, we do have to find time for self-care, but we also have to take it lightly, because we're not so much in charge as we tend to think we are.
Exactly.
The spirituality teaches you to step into a supportive flow where less effort is needed, but it takes a little surrender and trust. And I think you learn that in community. I think you learn that this person just takes time to do this thing, and they seem quite balanced and happy and peaceful. So the actual reality of that is coming from the lived example of those around us, rather than just the theory in books.
Sure.
And one of the things that I would say of all the people that I work with, and all the people that have come and taken yoga recovery over the years, they have been my teachers. They've taught me a great deal. So we can read the books, but the people that we learn alongside are really the greatest teachers.
Right. That's wonderful. And so true. Mm-hmm. Tell me how the pandemic has changed your business model.
So I'm not sure I was ever in business.
Let me rephrase that. Tell me how the pandemic has changed your work.
Yes.
And you can tell me a few pros and a few cons or challenges.
Yeah.
So
even as I think of it as work, which is an old pattern of mine, it's like, it really is my love. I was introduced.
Well, that's obvious.
And so how can I share it now? Well, I can do these Zoom things, which has been so helpful, So I'd say we have benefited mostly from this. And really that's because I was scared of the Zoom stuff and the cameras and the interviews and things. I preferred to be in the situation where, I went to an ashram and I did the practices. And so we still like to do that. So we're waiting for that to happen. But the people on the platform now on Zoom are excited to now meet each other, because we have formed new Sangha. And when it comes and it opens up for us again, I have to give all honor to those people who run these non-profit ashrams. So away from the commodities and commercialization of yoga, there have been people for decades just holding space for people to be welcomed into some of the deeper yoga practices. And they're there 365 days of the year. Sure. So a lot of my main helpers are in those places. And, there we do share meals together, and we sit side by side and we practice together in the same room. So that brings in that real community connection. And they're always in beautiful areas of nature. So that really gives us that connection.
You have a healing environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we miss that as well. So that's the side, but it's not lost to us. It's just it's a break.
It's on hold.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where do you see your work, your dharma, the work you're doing with yoga of recovery and Ayurveda? Where do you see it in the next 5 years? How do you see your own personal and professional evolution?
I think just generally that I would have the energy to serve the way the times call for it, and that I can have the ability to collaborate, because what I am very aware of is the resource that is needed for healing is already here. And we need to get away from the idea of the big famous teacher. So my idea was really towards more collaboration. So I invite you, if you're a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist or a social worker or marriage and family therapist, like I'd like you to join the Yoga of Recovery Circle. Number one is to look after ourselves, because we often try to give too much, that baseline codependency. So we need to be able to take proper care of ourselves in lightness and in humor and in connection with other people, not to take ourselves too seriously. And then my idea, and it has been for a while, is to create a small group of people who will like mentor under me to create pods of care.
Sure.
So coming from a similar integrative offering, and then creating a certain level, a certain number of people to be connected in pods, so that it's not this like superstardom, like I've got 1 million followers. Well, who cares? That's just the same old.
Right.
Connectedness within the group, and then resourcing from within that group. So when I left my corporate career, like my inner voice said to me, I was in telecommunications, and it said, and my whole work was on convergence, my global private networks and stuff. And my inner voice said, they will go global. We need to go tribal. Like we need to find that like local kind of support of who we are as people in our place. So find your people, find your place.
That's wonderful.
And then offer your gifts there.
Yeah, well, Margaret Mead said it only takes a handful to change the world.
I do believe so.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that you encourage yoga teachers and addiction counselors and other modalities, people who are in various related fields, to work with you and to work with the yoga of recovery as well. So
because these are an extraordinary job that I could do if I had more time and energy.
Sure.
I don't, because we need to kind of put our focus, and it's the focus and attention that tends to bring us the best of what we can offer. And if we spread ourselves too thin, that's more difficult. So working with people who bring their people to yoga recovery and then are on that teaching platform, but then they can do their own practices of asana and pranayama, or even group therapy work they can do in a smaller group. So that's a beautiful thing.
That's lovely. So am I hearing that you really see yourself as a teacher of the teachers?
I think that has always been something that I don't see myself that way, but that's the way they organize it.
Yeah, because you can reach and the tentacles will be much more, there's a greater impact there. There's no doubt.
So if you're running the sober living homes, if you're in the addiction care, especially the front line, we need to get you cared for.
Of course,
they have such an immense job to do in the short space of time that they have. And so we want to offer them some support as they do that, and then reach their people as they go back out into the world. We can support.
That's awesome.
Continued timeline of care.
Awesome. Well, Durga, this was an absolutely awesome interview. Thank you so much. Just tell the viewers and listeners where they can find you, and it's yogaofrecovery.com.
yogaofrecovery.com, and my email is Durga, Durga, @yogaofrecovery.com. And we have a 12-week session starting up on the 21st of April, and this is the year 2021. So 4/21/21, we're starting. So we have Wednesday nights, 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, 7 to 9 Eastern time. And that's 1 week from today. So be in touch with me, go to the website, you'll see the sign up, and then be in touch with me because we'd love you to have you join the circle. And if you're listening to this and you've passed that date, you can still join us. I would say, you know, pretty much up till mid-May, you could still join us and get the benefit, because a lot of stuff with addiction recovery is we need to act now when we hear about it. So don't feel that time would keep you out, because once you're in with us, you have access to the materials for a year.
Okay.
So you have a way to catch up even as you come along with this. But it's there's a lot more to just theory. So you have a lot of time with the other participants in one-on-one, and you have some group exercises, and yeah, it's a nice combination. We have the book discussion meeting. We do have an open all fellowship 12-step meeting. And we're going to expand from that. So some of my assistants will teach us some really beautiful therapeutic yoga. So it's a very full schedule, and you're welcome to participate as your time allows.
Okay. And I can really say from personal experience, it's a wonderful group. So thank you so much today, Durga. I really appreciate you taking the time. And Durga Leela from Yoga of Recovery. Thank you so
part of the circle, Noreen. It was
absolutely
a great pleasure to have you there, and stay connected.
Always a pleasure, Durga. And good luck with the next session.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.